G'day and welcome to CTO Lifeline number 7, an episode we're calling 3-Point Perspective. I'll explain why later. In this episode, 3 coaches, 3 CTO coaches, and we're going to tackle audience contributed challenges. But first, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Noah Cantor. How are you doing today, Noah?
It's been an interesting couple of days. My eldest has gone off to space camp, so she's gone, and my youngest is enjoying having me all to herself, but also struggling a bit with her big sister being gone. I'm a tech leadership coach. I've been in and around technology for more than 20 years. I've worked in organizations of all sizes, from the very smallest to over 160,000 people, and in all aspects of technology, from service desk to back end, DevOps to leadership. And now I work with people all over the world as a coach, a fractional CTO, and a consultant. Today we've got Adam with us, who uses his 30 years of experience to help CTOs, startups, and scale-ups accelerate through CTO coaching and fractional CTO services. He's also the host of the CTO Playbook, a podcast to help CTOs excel in their role. How are you doing, Adam?
I'm brilliant. Thanks so much.
Cheers. And I'm Daniel Walters, former CTO and CIO for Seek Asia, and current host of CTO Lifeline along with Noah.
A recording of the show will be hosted on LinkedIn and our YouTube channel and available for viewing afterwards.
I was recently on an episode of the CTO Playbook, Adam. Tell us a little bit more about your podcast.
Yeah, so I started running the podcast a couple of months ago, and the intention of the podcast is to help CTOs level up from where they are. And the idea of the playbook format is that essentially I bring on people who are experts in some specific area of being a CTO. And we talk about their backgrounds and how they got there. But then the really interesting bit is talking through their playbook, which is normally a series of steps about how they typically go through a solution or problem state, or sometimes just a way of discovering some information. And we talk through those playbooks. And the idea is that as the listeners listen to each episode or watch it, if they're looking at it on YouTube, they can add that to their own playbook and add that to their own methods, their own approaches to tackling problems, solving challenges, discovering new information.
I really enjoyed being on the show with you. Adam's style of asking questions and the way he plans out the show is excellent. Yeah, it was a really enjoyable experience as a guest. And yeah, so check out that episode and all the other episodes. I think I've listened to every episode you've done, Adam, and dropped a few comments and things like that. I found it invaluable. There's a lot there, even for experienced CTO to get out of. So well done.
Thank you. It's been a fun one to do. And talking about restructuring with you was a good laugh, actually, because there's quite a lot of common areas where we'd both had similar kind of issues in the past.
Yeah, I imagine so many of our audience members as well.
Indeed.
So as Noah mentioned, this episode is dedicated to your questions. And to that end, we actually have a live guest CTO who has a challenge. So let's bring him on so I can introduce it. So we have Ollie Brand. Ollie is a passionate and energetic tech leader with over 20 years experience solving complex challenges. Currently acting as the CTO for the Collecting Group, which is collectingcars.com and watchcollecting.com. Ollie has led diverse teams in both startup and enterprise environments, striking a balance between fast-paced delivery and building scalable, resilient teams and architectures. Known for his enthusiasm and positive leadership, he brings a people-focused approach to every team he works with, earning him the reputation of being the enthusiastic bloke, which I always thought bloke was an Australianism, but yeah, it's gone global, which is awesome. So welcome to the show, Ollie. I'm going to bring up your question, and can you also re-articulate it in your own words? I'll bring it up onto the stage.
Yeah, sure. So my question is how you quantify the return on investment for technical debt. I tend to fall into 2 classical traps. I either overpromise that once we've done this, it's all going to be unicorns, rainbows, and the happy path, or I go for the slightly dark approach of holding the gun to the head and saying, if we don't do this, the entire site's going to go down and therefore it's going to be a massive problem. And I would love a third option or a slightly more professional approach. And I'm very curious as to what you'd all recommend.
Can you give us a recent example where you've been on one side or the other, just to bring the challenge to life a bit, make it a little bit more concrete, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So we're currently spread across 2 code bases, and we're continually having to justify the fact that some elements of our work takes twice as long because we have to not only do them twice, but find a way of getting that to work, which is an additional level of complexity. I feel sometimes like a bit of a stuck record saying, I'm sorry, this is going to take twice as long until we can address this technical debt. But I don't really have a way of getting ahead of that, if you like, or saying that if we address this is the payoff. And it does sound obvious to say it will stop having to do it twice, but that's not a feature in itself. So it all roads lead me back to the path of how can I quantify this?
So quick question there then, is the 2 code bases, is that because you're mid-migration?
Yeah.
Or is that because you're, okay, mid-migration?
Yeah, we're midway through. Or as another example, upgrading from Node version 14 to Node version 20 on one of our microservices. How would we justify that to businesses? Look, we're not going to do anything to this for a couple of weeks because we want to spend the time to upgrade to Node, which in theory, if we do it well, means there's no real perceivable gain or notable change for the business. But if we do it badly, could again risk taking the site down, or it's 2 weeks spent doing something else.
How are you currently prioritizing which piece of debt?
So I work with our head of product and we decide what we're going to do, and then we effectively get to sell it back to the business. It has to be revenue based or feature based to accelerate it. And we're operating around 60-40 in terms of addressing technical debt and prioritizing features. Yeah.
Are there any qualitative improvements that come with the new code base?
The new code base, yes, probably. That's probably the worst example because I think once we're on that, we'll be faster to develop. So we're halfway through, but it's more like how would you justify something where there isn't a qualitative benefit?
Noah, do you have any clarifying questions?
Do you have to justify it?
That is a great question. To a certain extent, no. And that's what we've been doing to this point. But I would really like to, because I feel like when I'm pushed into a corner, the only 2 responses I do have for this, for example, when the board very rightly challenged me, why are we spending all of our money doing this? My options really are because I don't want the site to go down, or because it's going to be so much better when it's done. And anything in between would be good.
So you're talking to the board about this, and that's actually the conversation you want to be able
And
to
our
have.
CEO, so our non-technical senior leadership team and board.
Okay. So there was actually, we did an episode not that long ago with Adelina Chalmers, where we talked about how we actually address the board. And one of the things that came up is it's really important to understand what the motivation is that drives the board's questioning and the board's behavior, and talk about what you're doing in terms of that. So instead of showing up and telling them your arguments, the question that I have as a result is, what drives them? What are they interested in?
Interesting. Revenue growth is the primary driver.
So then a lot of the questions, a lot of the framing would be, how does the work that you're doing assist with driving revenue growth?
I think that's where I have my disconnects. Other than keeping momentum and keeping things easier to develop, there's no direct quantitative link. If I could join that dot, that would be ideal.
And the other side of revenue is protecting revenue as well. You mentioned about the risk of the site going down. The loss of pace can be quantifiable in a way, and protection of revenue can be quantifiable. So what would it cost us if we were down for X number of hours or X number of days can be an angle in.
That's where I feel like I'm being slightly too negative or holding the gun to the head analogy, because I don't really want to leave the board thinking, wait a minute, Ollie might not have this. I want them to leave confident that I've got it, but I just want them to understand that we do need to do this.
There's another question I think that I want to ask, which is that you are currently trying to gain revenue, to break even, to make profit. I'm not sure where the path you are to even find product market fit. Is it important right now with that, if that's the goal, to actually be addressing your tech debt? this particular tech debt?
That is a great question. Because we're losing too much time in terms of the split between two code bases, definitely because we're losing too much time. And in terms of some of the technical debt and risk we're carrying with slightly older versions of software, I think, unfortunately, yes. I think we've got to that stage where we're profitable and we're obviously looking for growth for all startups, but we want to protect that profit. And a lot depends on our reputation as an auction platform. If we go down in the closing stages of an auction, which is obviously when our system's the most loaded and the most viewed, that's not a good look. You can do it once or twice maybe, but if you do it a few times, people get very upset. So I think we're at that stage where we do need to address some of this. And in fairness to our board and our CEO, both of them are on sides that we want to do it.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, it's also about timeframes, because it's very tempting for the CTO to sit down in front of the board and talk about the things that's immediately next. Whereas the board tend to take a longer time frame in terms of how they look at things. And so therefore, if we can think about the projects we've got on our plate, the decisions we're trying to take right now, and some of the concerns that we have as engineers and information security specialists, and put that on the overall timeline, then we can think about it from the point of view of, okay, our long-term goal is to look like this, but shorter term, there are these sort of stops that we've got to go on to get there. And then it's a case of, okay, it's about momentum and velocity. And therefore, the small projects that we're doing, position them as small projects in the grand scheme of where we're going. This project is to accelerate the flywheel. This project is to reduce risk. This project is to whatever it might be, and then position them in sequence, in order, and saying, these are the bets that I'm taking at the moment in this order. That normally feels a lot more credible as a stepping stones to the longer term milestone that the board are normally looking for. Because the board aren't looking, are you credible and have you got it? They're looking for, do you have a plan and can you stand behind it? Does it stand up to questioning? And so therefore, if you come at it from that point of view, can I defend it when I get questions on it, rather than, am I going to get shot down for saying the wrong thing? It changes your outlook and the way that you talk to the board and the way that they receive it too.
That's brilliant. That talks to Noah's advice. That's exactly what the board want. They want to feel like I've got it and therefore they don't need to worry about it, more so than they want the justification. Yeah, I like that a lot. Thank you.
There's good opportunities to be able to tell a story around addressing risk. We used to use lead time and other measures like that. And another strategy you can use with the board and other executives is proactive communication. So if you know down the track they will need to understand some concepts, then ahead of time, and you can do it in bite-sized chunks so you're not bored with it, but you can communicate some of those concepts so that they've got a bit more of that awareness. Okay, if we don't do our upgrades, the penalty might be X down the track. And I know that can sound like ambulance chasing or something, a security firm banging down the doors, but some of it is true, right? There needs to be a certain amount of honesty and a real assessment of what the actual risks are.
I've started trying to do that a little bit with our CEO. So I was trying to explain to him about entropy. And that's something maybe I can do at the board level as well, that if we just leave things alone, they descend into chaos. And that especially applies to IT systems and the need to constantly maintain them and update them. So that's...
And there's a huge power in simplicity as well. If we can keep things simple, it's easier to maintain, easier to operate, and quicker to change. That's true of operations as it is of building software and running infrastructure. And so putting things in relatively straightforward terms like that becomes very comprehensible. And then where we've got things that are quite difficult to understand, then using a good subject relevant analogy can really help. I was working with one company who were in the sort of sports space, and the CTO there took an analogy of what it's like a sailing boat, he said. So I'm doing maintenance on the sails and setting the sails. That was the sort of the small trimming. But then he said, taking out the great big drag chute that they were dragging behind them, that was getting rid of some of their tech debt. And it's just very visual, very quick, easy to understand. And the analogy holds up to questioning. So have a think about, maybe there's something in the auction space you can think of that's a relatively straightforward analogy you can use that'll put the board in the mind of where you're coming from.
Rubbing the oil into the woods or something like that. I'm sure there's some analogies there. Maybe instead of entropy, we used to use the concept of like pay as you go, to pay off some of these things as we go, rather.
There's a question around how well do they understand the requirements of ongoing product maintenance? A lot of organizations that I've worked with in the past, the people outside of technology think of tech in terms of projects as something that's worked on and then is done and
Done.
then is
Yes.
finished forever. So if your board has that understanding, there's going to need to be some talking about the ongoing maintenance requirements, similar to the entropy conversation that you mentioned. But if they already understand that software has an ongoing maintenance price, then tech debt often can be folded into making the system continue to run.
I think we're definitely in the former camp. But I do think that's my entry in. I also think, if I can tell you now confidently, we're at 60-40 in terms of our efforts into technical debt and into new features. If I can also use that as a KPI and say, actually, now we're down to 35% as a result of doing this work, and track that and bake that into the narrative along with analogies and the roadmap, I think that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you
Right.
can use a benchmark as to where you expect to get to when you're at the steady state with a single code base, then they can get an understanding of where that money's going. And I've seen companies use anything from 5 to 25% in terms of a steady state, good tech debt level. Try and get yourself an idea of where you think it will be, then use that as your target. And then that becomes a nice, simple, straightforward KPI for your board to track. And you can use that as an easy way of measuring it.
25 seems very reasonable. Is that your experience as well, Daniel? No.
For me, sorry,
tech
Danny, you go
Yeah,
first.
yeah, around that sort of level of investment, absolutely.
For me, so early days, you're going to be focusing a lot less on tech debt because there's just less cruft that's accumulated over time. So it's hard for me to answer for your specific product, but that's where I'd turn it around and ask you, how early in its life cycle is the product that you're actually maintaining at this point?
We're about 4 years in and we've got quite a lot of craft, to use your term. So I think I think 40% is higher than I'd like it to be. I think 25% is that's the figure I had in my head before our call began.
Yeah, I don't typically fix it per team. You might need to raise investment for a period and lower.
Yeah, and in many ways, the amount of time that you're spending works better as a lagging indicator rather than a target. So if you're currently spending 60-40 and you expect that to go down when you finish working on dual code bases, that's absolutely fine. But expecting it to go down to a number is something that I would be a bit wary of, because if you end up at 35% instead of 25%, how is the board going to react? It's far easier to measure it looking back and say, it's trending down over time. We don't know how long it's going to keep trending down, but every time it does, it speeds up our ability to deliver. It reduces our risk. It improves things. And so we're going to keep working on it until it's at a level where we're all comfortable.
I tend to report my KPIs monthly to the board. Maybe this is one to report at the end of a project and say this is the impact that we've had and the rate from there.
Or quarterly, because sometimes you do it at the same rate at which you do, for example, the quarterly accounts and the major forecasts. But absolutely right not to use it as an absolute target. I can't remember the name of the rule, but it's very reminiscent of the fact that as soon as you have a KPI that you use as a target, it becomes a bad KPI.
Oh, what's that rule?
That's Goodhart's law.
There you go.
Goodhart's law, yeah.
Good hearts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ollie, for sharing your challenge. And you already listed through a few of the things that you were going to put into place. So we're keen to hear how it goes. So good luck with your challenge.
Good luck.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay. Well, that was Ollie's challenge. Now let's go back to the board and see what we have. So this one is from an anonymous CTO. I have been given feedback that I'm not delegating effectively, and my team tells me I'm micromanaging. What am I doing or not doing that leads to people feeling this way?
This is a fun question, and it's one that I think a lot of new CTOs often struggle with, because they're moving from an engineering position or close to an engineering position where they're hands-on, and they step into a role where they're expected to be hands-off, and they're expected to hire people who know more than they do. Their role as a CTO now is about strategy, and it's about being a bridge with the business to help understand what's going on in technology and help technology know what's going on in the business. And so they rapidly lose the ability to make effective decisions without coming across as overbearing or second guessing or controlling. And I think that's a real struggle that a lot of CTOs have.
Yeah, sure.
what would it take for you to feel like your team could be trusted enough so that you didn't have to be involved?
Great
And
question.
I think the mindset here often comes from the position of, up until now, the CTO has probably been the technical expert, one of the best people at doing the role. And in the past, it's always worked that they've been able to jump in, fix something, be the person of authority. However, they're in that transition, aren't they, Noah, from doing to leading. And it's that trying to switch to a sort of a coach or a teaching mentality in allowing others to fail at the things that you know you could succeed at. Because the value isn't in you succeeding, the value is in them learning. And
Right.
unfortunately, success doesn't teach us nearly so well as failure does.
And it's a trap, right? Because if you continue to step in, the teams will continue not to learn and they will continue to need you to step in. And so by stepping in, you're creating this environment where you can never progress and never grow into what you need to be, because you're always going to be fixing something because you can't let other people make that mistake.
That's it. And that first mindset shift is to allow other people to grow, give other people space, the room to learn for themselves rather than learn because they're copying you.
I remember this transition. I remember initially feeling, oh, so I'll try it this way. Ah, no, they're telling me that's micromanaging. I'll try it this way. Ah, they're telling me, so it's really this sort of whack-a-mole type game. But eventually, I think an important part here is you need a regular reflection point, like a regular almost check in with yourself, because that's the only way that you can detect that sort of, that realization, I've created a dependency on myself. And if I do this same thing again, then we're going to get the same result. And the team will need me to step in, and I'm always going to be too busy and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, that would be my key advice. Even if you have to put it in the calendar, how are things going right now? How will that play forward into the future?
I think there's also a question around guidelines. So you've been the person fixing disasters, but not everything's going to be a disaster. And so getting really clear on, so what is it, where is the line where you can start letting go? What level of potential disaster are you willing to live with? So that you can actually just let people make mistakes up into a certain point, and at that point you step in. And over time that gets further and further away so that you step in less and less. But it can be difficult to let go, and it can be difficult for a lot of people to go cold turkey and just step away. And so just having some rules for yourself that are clear to the team as well about when you'll get involved and when you won't can really ease that transition.
Yeah. If you want to go the cold turkey route, I always suggest the advice that Michael Lopp gives. He's known online as Rands in Repose. And he always says, delegate until it hurts and then delegate some more. And when I was working at Palantir, I didn't understand it in very early days. I was working when he was in the same engineering teams. I didn't get it. It was only until years later that I really got it. But it is really that case of just delegate absolutely everything you possibly can and then step in when it is absolutely disaster and you're just going to save it from the jaws of death. But other than that, don't step in. Let the other people learn and figure it out. You just got to make sure the fire doesn't get too bad. So you act more as the firefighter of last reserve rather than the first in.
And in some ways you can think of it as in similar ways that you would raise children if you have them, right? The relationship's obviously different. You're not a parent to the people and you shouldn't treat them like children, but the learning process is very similar. So as a parent, what's the line for when you step in? Do you try to prevent them from ever hurting themselves? Do you try to prevent every mistake your child makes? And if you do, what do you think the consequences of that are? Do they grow up well-rounded? Do they grow up capable of figuring all those things out for themselves? Because every parent has a limit where they'll let their kids feel a certain amount of pain and a certain amount of trauma before they step in. And this isn't any different. They have to feel pain to learn. They have to experience mistakes to learn. They have to try things and have them not go well.
And related to this theme of delegation, we've got a contribution from the audience. Jahan Zinedine, what and how to delegate are the other challenges when you're no longer an individual contributor?
And I always think of the one-way door, two-way door made infamous by Amazon's management technique here, which is if you've got any kind of decision that's a two-way door, in other words, you could make this decision, you could go through this door, and if it turns out to be the wrong decision, you can just turn around and come straight back through that door again. those are the ones that you should delegate with no question, no hesitation. Anything that's a one-way door decision that once you've gone through it, it's either so expensive or so difficult to unmake that decision that it needs careful deliberation. Those are the ones that you should not delegate. And it's a relatively simple framework to use to understand when and how to delegate, I find.
Yeah. I always think about, will the individual involved live and will the organization live? And if the answer to those two questions is yes, then it's worth delegating. And so that creates a pretty wide sphere of what can and will be delegated. If it's survivable, then it's worth it. Yeah.
So Daniel and I have talked about this before, and we keep using the word delegate, and I hate it. The whole notion, I think, is somewhat flawed in its set of assumptions, which is that you are the power and other people can temporarily have power, but really you're the source. That's the assumption behind the idea of delegating. I hire people because they're better than me. I don't hire them to be better than them. I'm not here to second guess their decisions. My job is to provide an environment and a set of guidelines and a framework where they can do amazing work, which means in many ways, the idea of delegation is flawed. I think it's flawed in its premise, because actually they should be the ones making the decisions. They should be the ones with the power. They should be the ones with the control. And I'm going to work really hard to make that reality. So when it's reached a point where they're no longer comfortable or no longer capable of making the decision because it's exceeded their knowledge, it's exceeded their capabilities, it's exceeded their power, whatever it is, only then do I need to get involved. And so it's different. I'm good at solving this set of problems. They're good at solving this set of problems. That's not delegated. That's where they should be working. That's where they should be operating. And so
Areas
just
of
let them operate.
accountability.
Yeah, and I think we covered some of these topics on the specifics of, I'm going to call it delegation, just so everyone knows what we're talking about. But I do agree with the approach. Like where we should be working towards is that idea that people are more in a more of a pull model, where they're like, okay, I can see this opportunity. I know how to tackle it. But you start from where you are, and you join a new organization that may not be the model practice, and there's you start with what you can provide. Are we ready for another question?
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, this is another anonymous CTO, and they have the question, how to self-assess. Is there some frameworks, checklists, or rules of thumb that can help with that?
Yeah, self-assessment is one of those things where it automatically wants a level of reflection, self-reflection. The challenge is that often, especially when we're early in our career as a CTO, we don't really know the definition of what good looks like. And so therefore benchmarking ourselves against an unknown quality level is really hard to do. I think this is where the power of the mentor comes in, where you can basically ask somebody else and say, hey, looking from the outside, how do you think I'm doing? Where are my blind spots? And that one question is often the first stage of setting some sort of framing of what should good look like for me at the stage I'm at, in the company I'm in the industry I'm operating in. And then that gives you a good idea. The other one, of course, is asking around you. As the CTO, you're a member of the senior executive team, the C-suite. What are the expectations on you? Have you asked your CEO, CMO, CFO what they expect of you? That will give you a really good idea of what good looks like. But at the end of the day, it's self-reflection, and self-reflection is hard. It's not easy.
Mm.
Yeah. So a couple of things come out of what you're saying there, Adam. One of them is about the kind of mentor. And a lot of what we are often taught as engineers is to be self-reliant and to have all the answers, or to go off to the internet and find the answers. And when you step into an executive role, you're not going to have them anymore, because the answers involve the way that you communicate your technical sphere of interest as a business concern to everyone else who's interested in their parts of the business. Sales conversations are very similar in that salespeople, instead of talking just about their sales activity, need to translate that into what's good for the business. This isn't a tech and the business conflict. This is a senior executive struggle for every senior executive. But a lot of us, and I include myself in this, get up to that CTO role without ever having had a coach or an external relationship that says, these are the things that are expected of somebody in this role. And here's someone that you can talk to about, are you doing the role? How does it work? What do you need? And so CEOs have them, CFOs have them, marketing heads have them. But I run into very few tech leaders who think that they can get away with having a coach or a mentor that the company would pay for or support, or they'd support their time or they'd support their efforts. And it's largely untrue because the other executives are usually getting that kind of support.
And it's frustrating because it's something that persisted since the role was created in the 1980s when the first CTOs appeared. They were expected to be, yeah, as you said, the answers all come from the compiler, from Stack Overflow, from Reddit. But that idea of collaborating with another team to figure out what's needed at a business level that's to do with metrics that are nothing to do with the technology, and therefore being able to be assisted in all the other aspects that come with that. Yeah. And I find it frustrating that people don't even, if you ask CTOs who've never had a coach, what is be the biggest multiplier they could have, and give them 10 options, 9 out of 10 will not mention a coach.
Mm. Yeah, I've seen it quite commonly where CTOs have been offered coaching and mentoring and they've refused. I think that's quite a common story. It was my own story. The first time I had it offered to me, I was like, I don't have time for this. It felt like something had been added to the plate. So yeah, I definitely empathize with that feeling. But to pick up with something that you said earlier, Adam, so you said engaging with your peers and asking about their expectations. And yeah, I agree. From my experience, I found that really helpful. And using that to build up a model, like your own sort of model or mental mechanism for what is success for you and your role in your organization. So use those conversations to add to that model was something that I found really helped me. And then you can use that model in your communications and all those elements.
I want to add an additional dimension to this, which is everything that we've talked about so far is about how I'm doing the job. Do I have the skills? Am I executing well? And a lot of the roles that we do as leadership are built on a set of assumptions that we've inherited from our managers and they've inherited from their managers all the way back to the industrial era, which is there are a certain limited number of ways that you can do this job well, and they implicitly all require coercing people into doing things. That means that a lot of our assumptions about how to manage people and how to look after people start from that point. And when they start from that point, but you don't believe that, then you end up in conflict and you often don't even realize it. So you carry around a lot of stress that says, look, I'm ticking all the boxes, right? I'm doing the job well, having one-to-ones, and the team is doing what I tell them to. Why do I feel like I'm not doing the right job? Why do I feel so out of sorts? And a lot of the time it's because the way that you're behaving is actually in conflict with the way you want to behave, but you've never actually thought about it. And for a large number of the people that I work with, in fact, for pretty much every CTO that I work with, self-assessment starts with understand what matters to you, understand your goals, understand your values, understand how you want to interact with people, understand how you want to shape the organization so that you feel at home and you can lead your way. Modern businesses don't just have one right way of leading. There are thousands of them. And so you don't have to feel like you're in conflict with yourself. You should never have to feel like that. That stress shouldn't exist. But because they don't get support and because they don't have anyone helping them go through that self-reflection, they do what I did, which is they manage based on how they were managed, regardless of whether or not that suits them as people.
And I think a key thing there is one of the key assumptions that we're always at risk of skipping over. And that is, especially for somebody who's coming into the C-suite for the first time, ask them who their team is. And a lot of the time they give an answer that is, yeah, as you say, in conflict with itself. They answer something like, oh, my team leads or my engineering leaders. Whereas the first team, the concept of the first team is it's the C-suite. That's your team. And just getting that bit right first can totally shift somebody's mindset onto the path of being a leader rather than being a manager.
And that shifts the way you think about the results that you're responsible for as well. Instead of thinking about purely, okay, we're going to get through this many iterations or we're going to have this availability, you start to think about what is the connection between those things and the outward performance of the company. So that might be like, all right, that availability enables us to collect our revenues or find those sort of causal links between the work you're doing and the results of the organization. I don't know if you guys remember there was a Jay-Z CV that was going around. Now, it turned out it was created by a marketing company, but it was like this one pager and it was like, it just had these bullet points. I don't know, founded this record company and did this. And it just was a terrific story of success. And so I found that quite inspirational to go, oh, that's an interesting way to think about my CV. And then like, how do I work backwards from some of those characteristics, those deliverables to what we do? Are we ready for another question? Also, just a reminder to anyone in the audience. So we have solicited a few questions, but if you have questions, we'll happily jump onto those and talk through those. So feel free to drop your questions into the comments. And in the meantime, okay, from another anonymous CTO, translating business and tech languages. What are your strategies, your mental mapping models, your dictionary for translating concepts from one side to another? Is there any resource that can be helpful around this? Or do you have to reinvent this glossary each time with each new team, organization, or set of stakeholders you're working with? And are there some strategic actors besides the CTO that should also master this capacity? Great question.
Good question.
I think if we refer back to Adam's notion of your first team from just a minute ago, we talk about, are we going to have to reinvent this language every time? And in some degree, the answer is yes, because you're forming a team with a new group of people and you're starting to work with them. And so it's really important that any team have an agreed definition of what words mean, right? A shared vocabulary that they can use. And so my first question, or at least the one that comes to mind, is what is it that this team that you're working with cares about? What matters to them? Very similar, I think, to what we were talking about with Ollie in terms of how do we talk to the board? What are the interests that this group of people has, and how do you talk about what you're doing in terms of what they need or what they're curious about?
Yeah, and I always talk about the languages of business, plural, because there are some languages that we have that are going to be common everywhere. So we've got the language of technology, the language of DevOps, software engineering languages, we've got infrastructure in place, we've got certain ways of working, our agile, scrum methodologies, whatever. That's one language. On the other side, we've got the language of the business, things like return on investment. We've got things like customer acquisition cost, lifetime value, all these numbers and metrics, whether it's a SaaS business or a sales-led business, no matter where it is, there is a set of financial terms which are fairly inviolable because they're pretty much in the gap. The accepted accounting practices, globally accepted accounting practices, which set a set of terminology. But then we also have our domain, which is often the translation point. If we're working at, say, for example, Ollie was working in the auction space, there's a whole lot of terms that become relevant to auctions, which are the metrics and the measures upon which that business is built. And so therefore you've got these three languages to translate between. And as the technologist, the senior technologist, you need to form those bridges and those ways of taking concepts from one of those languages to the others. So from that perspective, those combinations of languages is always going to be relatively unique. And there are some places where you can minimize it. Fintech, for example, finance is 2 of the languages, 2 out of 3. So you cheat a little bit. But most other environments, you've got a domain language to translate to as well. And that sort of drives you're going to have to reinvent it every time, along with what Noah was saying about the people are going to be unique and that team is going to be different. And especially in a startup, your definition of a startup is it's a temporary organization trying to figure out a business model. Well, if the business model is changing every time, your language is going to change every time.
Mm. So you're working with your first team and you're building a shared model. It's interesting the expectations that go on to a CTO, and a lot of CTOs that I've met that have been successful. You could describe them as a people of letters with far more humanities skills than you might expect out of CTOs. The model is probably new for every organization, and it's one that the first team need to recognize that they're building together.
There's a question, the end question from the slide as well. Are there any strategic actors besides the CTO that should also master this capacity? But everyone in the C-suite needs to do that for their own domain. And because sales deals with numbers, it's often easier for them, but marketing, finance, your CEO, everybody has a domain specialty that they're working from. And everybody needs to learn to translate that domain specialty into language that everyone else sitting around the table can understand. And so at that level, you all have the same struggle. And so you're all figuring it out together. If you're asking from the perspective of, does anyone else in the tech space need that? Then the answer depends entirely on the shape of the organization. So often principal engineers in many places will need to have that skill because they'll be the most senior technical person talking to the board or talking to other parts of the business. It is possible based on the shape of the business that you'll need multiple people in technology to have that same set of skills.
Yeah, quite often I see the VP engineering as somebody in exactly that place you're talking about, Noah, there. But then I think also within the C-suite, there are some of those domains that are closer to technology than others.
Absolutely.
And I find that the two that are often closest are product and operations, because operations is often running on top of the technology, servicing the technology, servicing customers through the technology. And then product is clearly the thing itself that's being built. And so therefore that relies on understanding of how it's built and what it's consisting of in terms of those technologies. So I find that there are some who have a greater empathy for the translation load you have as the CT than, for example, somebody who's like the CFO, slightly further away from technology normally.
And they can make great partners. I'd also include design and research there as well. So members from all of those teams have, as you say, the empathy, the connection, and can contribute to the language or the shared model that you're building over time. And look, it's not something you need to get perfect straight away. It's something that you're always chipping away at and trying to find what is the ways that resonate with all the people that are contributing. Yeah.
And early days, I'd say that analogies are a good sort of shortcut. You can try out different analogies, how people react to them. And the ones that people react to and to extend beyond where you took it, that's probably a good one. You can use that as the basis for more translation.
That's a great tip, Adam. We have an audience question, so I'll bring that up on screen. And this might be our last question for the day. Jahan Zinadine says, my next question is the plan for the first 90 days of the CTO. I'm interested in your insights. Thanks. Now, we touched on this on our episode of the CTO Playbook, didn't we, Adam?
Yeah, this is very much looking at your experience of restructuring organizations and when to resist the temptation to restructure immediately, which I think is often the temptation of a CTO incoming to make their mark. So that was one aspect that we looked at as well. But I think there is a general sort of 90-day plan that a lot of people look at where the first 30 days is just to absorb as much information as possible. The second 30 days is to begin to start with hypotheses about where changes would be made. And the next 30 days would be making some of those changes and seeing the first results of the first feedback from those changes. Now, what I would say is if you're in a much smaller organization or early stage startup, that might not be 90, that might be 45 in that situation. But I think in terms of that sort of 90-day plan, which I think is generally referred to as the enterprise onboarding plan, it's worth having a look at and using it as a framework, because even if the timelines are compressed from 90 days, the rough stages that you go through should be roughly right.
A lot of people drill into the 90, but the important thing was really the message around listening and observing. So yeah, you can apply judgment and set a time frame that makes sense for your context.
Is avoiding the knee jerk of bringing in what you've had elsewhere because it worked somewhere else.
That is such a common trap.
Yeah. I was just reminded of this yesterday. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the rules is first seek to understand. and then to be understood. And so the parallels when you're coming into a new organization with a whole bunch of new people, or you're stepping into a new role, are fairly clear, in that the first thing you want to do when you're new is understand what's going on, what's happening, what's working well, what's not working well, where are things getting stuck, what conflicts exist in the organization, who works well with who else, who's in conflict with who else. Just get a grasp of the domain that you're in and forge relationships with the people around it that you're going to need to work with. So talk to the other executives and their direct reports, talk to people who are responsible for work that shows up in your team, and just form the bridge that's going to form the basis for all of your future communication. That may take, as Adam says, that might take, you shrink it down to a 45-day period, or it's a 90-day period. That bit takes as long as it takes, depending on the size of the organization. But once you've gotten there and you have those relationships and you understand each other and you can talk to each other, then you can start thinking about what changes need to be made and how do we think about approaching these changes. Until you have those relationships, nobody's going to want to listen to you.
Yeah, we often talk about political capital and building it up before you can spend it.
Noah, Adam, is there any key points you wanted to repeat for the audience, or as a wrap up? Is there anything that sort of stuck in your mind as being critical revelations from today?
I think there's been quite a few, but I think one of the things that comes across as a thread through a lot of these questions we've had is listen and understand first, and then communicate as clearly as you can.
Great one.
For me, there's always the question of how well do you understand yourself and your own needs, and start there, and then seek to understand other people, and then seek to introduce change. So it's very much a self-awareness. We talked about self-assessment. It's a theme that runs through everything, I think. What about you, Daniel?
We talked quite a bit in a few of the questions around recognizing that your executive peers are your first team, and so that can guide your actions as a CTO. So making sure that you're investing time, listening, observing, talking with them, asking for feedback. Where can we find you, Noah? And do you have anything you'd like to share with the audience?
You can find me at noahcantor.com. If the conversations we've had today have resonated with you and you'd like to explore possibly whether or not we'd be a good fit for working together, then you can go to the website there, noahcantor.com/discovery call, and sign up, book a call with me, and we can see if we're a good fit for each other.
Right.
Yeah, I'm easily findable online on Synova.tech, and I'm also discoverable on LinkedIn with the name Adam Horner. LinkedIn.com/in/Adam Horner. So very easy to find there as well.
Yeah, and absolutely check out the CTO Playbook, an indispensable podcast listen for CTOs. Thank you very much for coming on the episode and sharing your insights. It's been a blast. And I've been Daniel Walters. You can find me at my brand spanking new TLD. I've got .me. So again, if you're interested in what you've heard today, then you might like some of my writings there. I've got a blog, Great CTOs Focus on Outcomes. So check it out. And yeah, I think that was terrific. If you have the opportunity for coaching, if someone says, hey, we'll pay for some coaching for you, then don't do what I did. Don't refuse it. Don't labor on for another year or so before finally accepting some help. Take that opportunity. And if you like what you heard from us, then talk to us, but at least talk to someone. Thank you so much. And press.